If you found a locket etched with CB, beloved, and discovered the woman in the photograph never existed the way the town remembers her, would you dare to follow the trail? The courthouse bell chimed 8:30 on a Tuesday morning that tasted of coming snow. Samuel Worth buttoned his wool coat against the November wind that swept down from the Black Hills and rattled the auction notice tacked to the telegraph pole. The paper bore a woman's name he'd never heard spoken, aloud Catherine Bellwether, and a list of her earthly goods. 160 acres, a sod house, barn, 2 milk cows, and sundry household items. Sam pulled the brass locket from his vest pocket and thumbed it open. The photograph inside showed a woman with dark hair pinned neat and eyes that seemed to look straight through the camera glass. On the back, someone had scratched CB, beloved, in careful letters. He'd found the locket 3 weeks ago in the mud outside Kellerman's general store, and every inquiry about its owner had met with shoulder shrugs and headshakes. "You fixing to bid today, Worth?" Jonas Kellerman emerged from his store, apron dusted with flour and a ledger tucked under his arm. The storekeeper's pale eyes lingered on the auction notice. "Depends on the starting price." Sam closed the locket with a soft snap. "You know anything about this Bellwether woman?" Kept to herself mostly. "Came in for supplies once a month, paid cash, never lingered for gossip." Kellerman adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles. "Heard tell she was a teacher back east before she took up that claim. Consumption took her, same as it took my Martha." The morning stage rumbled past, wheels striking stone in a rhythm that matched Sam's pulse. He had $23 to his name and a fierce hunger for land that went deeper than hunger for food. The Bellwether property sat 8 miles northwest, good water and shelter from the worst winds. Perfect for a man starting over. "Stage to Rapid City leaves at 10:15, Kellerman said, consulting his pocket watch. "If you change your mind about staying put." Sam folded the auction notice and tucked it beside the locket. "I'm not going anywhere." The courthouse bell struck 9, and he walked toward his future. ACT 3. The auction crowd gathered like crows around fresh corn. Sam counted 43 people on the courthouse steps, including 3 men in fine wool coats who looked like they'd stepped off the morning train from Chicago. Money men, land speculators with deep pockets and Eastern backing. Auctioneer Hiram Goss rapped his gavel against the wooden podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we commence this morning with the estate of Catherine Bellwether, deceased, as recorded in Dakota Territory Land, patent number 4817. Goss held up a folded document, the deed itself, brown with age and official seals. Sam's mouth went dry. That paper represented everything he'd dreamed of since leaving Ohio. 160 acres of prime farmland, including dwelling, outbuildings, livestock, and all chattels therein. Goss's voice carried over the murmur of the crowd. Opening bid set at $40. 3 hands shot up immediately. The price climbed to 60 before Sam found his voice. 65, he called out, his words barely audible above the wind. One of the Eastern men turned to study him. Expensive hat, gold watch chain, eyes like chips of flint. The man's bid came swift and certain. 75. Sam's fingers found the locket again. The woman in the photograph seemed to be watching him, waiting. He thought of her walking these same streets, buying supplies at Kellerman's, keeping her own counsel in a territory where most folk wore their business like Sunday clothes. 80, Sam said. The bidding stalled. Goss consulted his pocket watch at 10:15. The Chicago men huddled in conference, while Sam counted his money for the 3rd time that morning. $23 in his pocket, maybe 7 more if he could catch Jonas Kellerman in a generous mood. "Current bid stands at $80, Goss announced. "Do I hear 85? The man in the expensive hat smiled like a card sharp with 4 aces. 85. The courthouse bell chimed the half hour, and Sam Worth faced the hardest choice of his life. Midpoint, $100. The words left Sam's mouth before his mind could catch them. The crowd fell silent, except for the scratch of pencils on paper and the distant clatter of wagon wheels on Main Street. Sam's heart hammered against his ribs as he realized what he'd done, bid money he didn't have on land belonging to a woman he'd never met. But when he looked at the locket in his palm, at Catherine Bellwether's steady gaze, something settled in his chest like a key turning in a well-oiled lock. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about honoring a woman who'd carved out her place in this hard country, who'd lived and died without family to speak her name at auction. He belonged here, in this moment, holding her memory up against the wind. $100 to the gentleman in the brown coat, Goss called out. Do I hear 105? The Chicago men exchanged glances. The leader tipped his hat brim down, a gesture Sam read as clearly as words written in dirt. Too rich for our blood. Going once? Goss said. Going twice. Sam closed his eyes and felt Catherine Bellwether's land settling around his shoulders like a worn but warm coat. ACTIIB. The gavel's bang echoed off the courthouse walls like a gunshot, sold to Samuel Worth for $100. Applause rippled through the crowd, but Sam barely heard it over the blood rushing in his ears. Hiram Goss beckoned him forward with a crooked finger. Payment due immediately, Mr. Worth. Cash or certified bank draft. Sam approached the podium on legs that felt borrowed from someone else. He pulled out his $23 and laid the bills on the wooden surface like cards in a losing poker hand. I'll need a moment to arrange the balance, he said. Goss frowned and consulted his pocket watch. Auction rules require immediate payment. You have 15 minutes before I move to the next highest bidder. The Chicago men perked up like vultures, sensing weakness. Sam's mind raced through his options, none of them good. He could ask Jonas Kellerman for credit, but the storekeeper barely knew him. He could try the bank, but his collateral amounted to one worn saddle and a lame horse. Excuse me. A woman's voice cut through his panic. Sam turned to see a lady in a simple grey dress and practical bonnet approaching the podium. She was perhaps 30 years old, with calloused hands and the kind of steady composure that spoke of long acquaintance with hardship. Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, she said to Goss. I run the schoolhouse 2 miles south of the Bellwether property. She turned to Sam. I believe Catherine would have wanted her land to go to someone who'll work it honest, not to speculators who'll strip it bare and move on. Mrs. Briggs reached into her reticule and withdrew a small cloth purse. I have $37 saved from my teaching wages. Consider it a loan. Sam stared at her. Ma'am, I can't. You can and you will. She placed the money next to his bills. Catherine Bellwether was my friend. She taught me which herbs cure fever and which roots make the best soap. She deserved better than dying alone out there. Mrs. Briggs pressed something else into Sam's hand, a folded paper, yellow with age. I found this in her house when I went to prepare her body for burial. I think she'd want you to have it. Sam unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. It was a marriage certificate, dated 3 years ago. Catherine Bellwether and James Worth, his own surname, though he'd never heard of any James Worth in his family line. The courthouse bell struck 11 o'clock, and suddenly Sam understood why the locket had felt so heavy in his pocket, why Catherine's photograph had seemed to watch him with familiar eyes. Time's up, Mr. Worth, Goss said. Do you have the full payment or not? Sam looked at Mrs. Briggs, at the marriage certificate, at the deed with Catherine's name written in careful script. Sometimes a man bought more than land at auction. Sometimes he bought a mystery that would change everything he thought he knew about himself. I have it, he said, and pushed all the money toward Goss. The bell chimed again, and Samuel Worth became the owner of his late wife's homestead. Act 3. The crowd began to disperse, but Sam stood frozen at the podium, the deed in one hand and the marriage certificate in the other. Catherine Bellwether Worth. His wife, a woman he'd never met, married to a man who shared his name but not his history, Mr. Worth. Mrs. Briggs touched his elbow gently. Perhaps we should talk. They walked to the bench beside the courthouse steps while the auction continued behind them. Mrs. Briggs settled her grey skirts and folded her hands in her lap like a woman accustomed to delivering difficult news. Catherine spoke of her husband only once, she said. Told me he'd died in a mining accident in Colorado before they could start their life together. She kept his name, kept expecting his family to come looking for her. Sam opened the locket and showed her the photograph. This woman, Catherine, I found this 3 weeks ago, in the mud outside Kellerman's store. That's impossible. Mrs. Briggs leaned closer to examine the image. Catherine never wore jewelry, said it was too fine for farm work, and she certainly never sat for a photograph in town. The church bell across the street began to toll noon, each chime driving deeper into Sam's confusion. He studied the marriage certificate again, noting the careful penmanship, the official seal, the date that placed the ceremony just months after he'd arrived in Dakota Territory. Mrs. Briggs, he said slowly. What did Catherine look like? Tall woman, brown hair she wore in a braid. Green eyes, strong hands from working the land. Had a scar on her chin from falling off a horse as a child. Mrs. Briggs paused. Why do you ask? Sam's heart began to pound. The woman in the locket had dark hair, yes, but it was pinned in an elegant style. Her hands were smooth, her dress expensive. No scar marked her delicate chin. This isn't Catherine, he whispered. The courthouse clock struck the half hour, and understanding hit Sam like a physical blow. Someone had planted the locket for him to find. Someone who knew about James Worth, about the marriage, about the land that would come up for auction. Who else knew Catherine was ill? He asked. Mrs. Briggs considered. Dr. Morrison, of course. The preacher who gave her last rites. And she frowned. Now that I think of it, there was a woman who came to visit her toward the end. Well-dressed lady from back east, claimed to be a distant cousin. The auction crowd was thinning now, but Sam spotted the Chicago men near their rented carriage. The leader, the one who'd bid against him, was speaking intently to a woman in an expensive traveling dress. Even from a distance, Sam recognized the face from the locket. Son of a gun, he breathed. Mrs. Briggs followed his gaze. That's her, the woman who visited Catherine. Sam stood up, his mind racing to piece together the swindle. The mysterious cousin had planted the locket, knowing he'd feel obligated to honor the unknown woman's memory. She'd counted on his conscience driving him to bid on Catherine's property, probably expected him to fail when he couldn't raise the money. But her plan had a fatal flaw. She hadn't counted on Mrs. Briggs. They wanted the land, Sam said. Figured they'd get it cheap when I defaulted on payment. The woman by the carriage turned in their direction, and Sam saw her eyes widen with recognition. She said something sharp to her companion, who immediately began walking toward the courthouse steps. Mr. Worth, Mrs. Briggs said urgently, what are you going to do? Sam looked at the deed in his hand, then at the marriage certificate. Catherine Bellwether Worth had died alone on her homestead, tended only by a schoolteacher who remembered her kindness. She deserved better than to have her memory used as bait in a land grab. I'm going to honor my wife's legacy, he said. The Chicago man was climbing the courthouse steps now, his expensive coat billowing in the wind. Behind him, his female accomplice climbed into the carriage and signaled the driver to prepare for a hasty departure. Excuse me, Worth, the man called out. I believe there's been some confusion about that auction. Sam turned to face him, the deed still clutched in his hand. No confusion at all. I bought the land fair and square. Yes, but you see, there are some irregularities in the title. Legal complications that weren't disclosed during the auction. The man's smile was as cold as January wind. I'm prepared to take the property off your hands for what you paid, save you the trouble of a court battle. Mrs. Briggs stepped forward. What kind of legal complications? The man ignored her, keeping his eyes fixed on Sam. The kind that could tie up the property in litigation for years. Expensive litigation. Sam felt the weight of the locket in his pocket, the folded marriage certificate in his hand. Catherine had faced down hardship and isolation to make her claim on this harsh land. He wouldn't let her memory be bought and sold by Eastern speculators. The deed is legal and recorded, he said. The land is mine. For now. The man tipped his hat. But I'd be careful if I were you, Worth. Dakota Territory can be dangerous for folks who don't know how to mind their own business. The threat hung in the cold air like smoke from a distant fire. Sam watched the man rejoin his accomplice at the carriage, noting how they kept glancing back at the courthouse steps. They're not giving up, Mrs. Briggs observed. Neither am I. Sam folded the deed carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket beside the locket. Mrs. Briggs, I wonder if you might do me one more favor. What's that? Help me learn about my wife. The church bell tolled 1 o'clock. and Samuel Worth began the long journey toward understanding the woman whose name he now carried. Denouement. 3 hours later, Sam stood in the doorway of Catherine Bellwether Worth's sod house, hat in hand like a man calling on a lady he hoped to court. The single room was neat and spare, a corn-shuck mattress, a pine table worn smooth by use, shelves lined with mason jars and medicinal herbs. Everything spoke of a woman who made do with little but wasted nothing. Mrs. Briggs moved through the small space with familiar efficiency, pointing out Catherine's belongings: the cast-iron stove she'd bought with her first teaching wages, the rocking chair she'd crafted from cottonwood branches, the Bible with passages marked for comfort during long winter nights. She was planning to expand, Mrs. Briggs said, pointing to a stack of lumber beside the door. Wanted to add a proper bedroom, maybe a parlor for entertaining. Said this territory needed more places where folks could gather for conversation and music. Sam ran his fingers along the smooth pine boards, imagining Catherine's plans taking shape under his hands. The land stretched beyond the doorframe, 160 acres of prairie grass and possibility, purchased with money he didn't have for a woman he'd never met. But standing in her house, surrounded by the careful accumulation of her dreams, Sam felt something he hadn't experienced since leaving Ohio: the sense of coming home. Mr. Worth. Mrs. Briggs withdrew an envelope from her reticule. I found this on Catherine's table the day she died. She'd written your name on the outside, James Worth, but never sent it. Sam accepted the letter with hands that trembled slightly. The envelope bore his surname in Catherine's careful script, along with an address in Denver that he'd never seen before. Inside, a single sheet of paper held Catherine's final message. Dear James, I know you are not coming. Dr. Morrison says the consumption will take me before spring, and I have made my peace with dying alone. But I wanted you to know that I have been a good wife to your memory, even if we never shared more than promises and a ring. The land is fertile and the water runs clear. Someone will love it after I am gone. I pray they will tend it with the same care you would have shown had you lived to walk these fields beside me. Your devoted wife, Catherine. Sam closed his eyes and felt the full weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was not the James Worth she'd married, but he carried the name and now the land. Perhaps that was enough. She thought her husband was dead, Mrs. Briggs said softly. Maybe he was. Sam folded the letter and placed it in his pocket beside the locket and deed. Maybe James Worth died in that Colorado mine, and Samuel Worth was born to take his place. The afternoon sun slanted through the small window, casting long shadows across Catherine's careful belongings. Outside, the wind carried the promise of winter and the distant sound of the evening stage departing for destinations unknown. Sam Worth, husband, widower, and landowner, stepped across the threshold of his new life. Mrs. Briggs smiled. She would have liked you, I think. I hope so, Sam said, and closed the door behind them. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, patient and waiting, as Samuel Worth learned to carry a dead woman's dreams into the uncertain future. If you'd like more stories like this, stay a while. I'll tell the next one tomorrow night.